Welcome to the Jones Zone, a podcast by Darryl and JJ Jones.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Jones Zone. Today, we are blessed with the presence of Amanda Horner. She is the fire marshal for the city of Placentia, California. With all the recent wildfires, in fact, frankly, this is almost every year now. Thought this would be a really great show to talk about what one could do to kind of fireproof as much as possible their house. And it's funny, I was thinking about, gosh, who could I get for the show? And I was talking to a friend of mine, Rhonda, and she said, how about a fire marshal? And I thought, oh, goodness. Yes, that's exactly what I need. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, Amanda. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, welcome here. So I'm going to just dive into it. So what are the most effective measures one can take to fireproof their home? Tell us what advice you have just with that question.
So first of all, I would say informing yourself of the requirements, doing as much research as you can on your own, to educating your family and your neighbors and say, what do we need to do? Identifying maybe things that you don't know. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. Starting there is always a great thing to do. And it's most effective because it brings it to your attention. I can identify gaps or things that you need to do for your home. And you say, do I need to modify my landscaping? Do I need to upgrade components on my house from the structure perspective?
Is there like an example that you can give that people have done structurally speaking? So for example, I've heard of encasing your eaves. Mm-hmm. Is that fair to say? And that's going to prevent, it's funny because I just now left an appointment and we were actually talking about that because of fire insurance being such a challenge nowadays. Mm-hmm. He was a contractor and I asked him, is there anything on the horizon where they're going to start making brick houses more or some sort of a fireproof material? He talked about how a lot of fires are started with embers going into the attic. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So the state does have requirements. So for a specific example that you asked, it would be to upgrade your vents, whether it's your attic space or crawl space, depending on the home. The state has requirements for the opening size of those vents. Smaller the opening, the smaller size of ember that would be able to enter. So they have to be a certain size to remain hot. When they travel through the air, they can travel miles. By the time they get down to a certain size, the chances of them actually causing a fire decreases. Sounds like it might be common sense, but if you have a vent with a large opening, a larger ember has a higher chance of getting into your attic and therefore causing a fire.
I even said, well, can't you just enclose completely? He says, no, you do need some ventilation there. Yeah. It's not something that you completely cover up. So just a really tight screen is what you're saying.
Yeah, I believe it's a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch is the the range for the opening.
How about vegetation? It's funny because the fire that passed through North Orange County, I think it was 2008 or so, if I remember correctly, we got evacuated. My family and I got evacuated from our house. So what we would do is tune into the local television show to find out, see if there's any news. You know, obviously you're a big fire. It's all over the news. And it was ironic because the helicopter on the news was filming our track that we lived in. Reporter talked about how this track was done a little bit more effectively by the vegetation they used was anti-fire. I forget what the term they used. It was cool. It put us kind of at ease because it was our track. So maybe you can talk a little bit about vegetation and or what to have and what not to have. Does that make sense?
Technical term that I think you're trying to get at is defensible space.
There we go.
And it seems simple, but in reality, it can be anywhere from 5 feet. They call it zone 0. So from your house out 5 feet, and then it extends from there another 30 feet, which is zone 1. Zone 2, which is out to 100 feet from your structure as the crow flies, not with the lay of the land. So if you have a slope or something like that, it can really be effective. And keep in mind that certain jurisdictions, so different fire authorities and different agencies, whether it's Anaheim, Brea, Fullerton, OCFA, anybody, they can have their own specific regulations that are above and beyond what the state requires in regards to those zones and what they want in them. Generally, they're about the same. But an example would be making sure that anything that's dead or dying is removed from any of the zones. That's going to be your ignition point. They're going to go a lot faster when they're dehydrated and don't have any water in them. Hardscaping is another big one that's included in those. And they kind of group it in with the vegetation because you can make it do natural scape, such as decomposed granite and some other natural materials versus concrete and some more modern looking things. You essentially want to keep your vegetation spaced out. Your trees, you want to limb them up so the branches don't grow all the way to the ground. We call those ladder fuels. If there's a fire in the grass, You don't want it to necessarily spread to your trees. If it can stay in the grass and be extinguished quickly, that's a lot better than climbing up to the crown fuels, they call it. Keeping your clearances. You don't want it near your chimney. You don't want it to go up under your eaves or even on top of your roof. Underneath windows and right up against the home too are definitely discouraged.
So don't surround your house with tumbleweeds.
100%.
Okay. So what else could possibly I do to create a defensible space around the property? And what is recommended for clearance? You already talked about that a little bit. So 5 feet. And can you delve into that deeper?
Zone 0 is, like I said, from the structure out 5 feet. They recommend little to no vegetation in that area, preferably non-combustible fencing, either concrete, gravel, or decomposed granite pathways. They even recommend removing or relocating trash bins and recycle bins because they burn, believe it or not. Patio furniture, whether it's on a combustible deck or it's just on the grass near your home, right up against your home or a back door. Having wood furniture versus something that's less combustible, like a polywood, not vinyl, because that will definitely burn. They do talk about roof material. Class A roof material is what is required for these wildland urban interface zones. What that means is your asphalt shingles, concrete, tile, something other than a wood shake. Gutters are a big one. Not everybody remembers, not everyone has gutters, but when they do, the most common would be metal or vinyl. Vinyl's gonna melt. There's a study that was done and some pretty cool video just to demonstrate the spread of fire in homes actually ignited by leaves and debris in the vinyl gutters. They catch on fire, they melt, and then they stick to the side or catch the vegetation down on the ground on fire.
Yeah, have you ever seen copper rain gutters? Very wealthy, or not
I was going to say it's
very wealthy. Yeah, it is pretty cool. But anyway, that would also accomplish that goal of not burning. So you talked a little bit about the roofing and fire resistant. Is it fair to say most all roofs other than wood? No, I guess there's composition. What would be the hierarchy of the types of roofs? You don't want wood because that's like a match, right? Especially a dried out wood roof.
Yeah, it would have to be treated. I would say anything like a tile or concrete tile. Obviously, an asphalt shingle does produce, it will eventually get hot and it could melt because of the tar and the other materials that are used to construct them. Something that's not going to burn. Clay tile, cement tile. I've seen metal roofs. I'm not sure what the studies have shown on that. If it conducts heat, might conduct heat to your wooden members.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely your concrete and your tile are going to be the least combustible.
We talked about roofing. What about windows and doors? What would you recommend?
So for windows specifically, double pane tempered glass windows are what's required for these wildland urban interface zones. What that does is the higher heat resistance, the actual glass won't melt as fast, if at all, depending on the heat exposure, if it's direct or radiant. There are requirements if you go to replace the windows in your home, they'll look at those wildland urban interface maps. And they'll say, hey, we can't install these whatever single pane windows, because when they go to pull a permit through the building department, they'll stop and say, yep, you got to have those double pane tempered glass windows.
Oh, yeah. They'll see it in the zone, in the fire zones and everything. Funny, you're talking about glass melting. I mean, I'm sure there's a certain point where, look, it's just going to burn.
Right. The idea behind the defensible space is to give your structure, your house, as much passive fire protection as possible. So give it the best chance. It's not a guarantee. It's not going to fireproof your home by any means, but it's definitely going to deter the fire, hopefully reroute it around you or around your community if the whole community is involved with that. You're right. There's only so much that we can do to a certain extent.
A buddy of mine runs in the hills there to the north, the oil companies and stuff. And I know when the last fire, one of the fires, I asked him, I said, gosh, what do you guys do for the oil rigs? I mean, that's obviously, if that catches fire, you're talking about some major, major issues, but apparently there's some sort of foam or something that they put over the oil. But I said, well, why can't they use that for houses? He said, it's just environmentally, it's got a lot of chemicals in there that aren't good, et cetera. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and there are some materials, and I've heard of some other communities, not in this county, where they have come together and they've purchased their own version of the fire retardant. And they do the spray application on their own through a private company, and they'll purchase the FOS check and they'll spray down if they know a fire's coming. Or if it's, a season, they have to reapply it. But there are environmental impacts to that, and it costs a lot of money. and it's temporary. Kind of got to balance that. If it's an immediate thing and you have some, I've heard of homeowners investing in a pump and a little stock of the Phos-Chek, and before they get evacuated, they spray their own area down. That's well above and beyond what the expectation is for the general public.
I was telling my wife this, and she actually told me, she's a little brighter than I am, probably a lot brighter than I am. Anyway, fire extinguishers, what they do is they remove oxygen, because I talked to her about that. Is that true? My point being is, she said, yeah, but if you do that, I think it removes oxygen. So you have to also vacate the house. Maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. Forgive me, but just curious.
Oh yeah, for like a basic fire extinguisher, like say if you had like a little trash can fire on your stove, the chemical in there displaces the oxygen. So it's not good to breathe that powder in. You always want to ventilate the space. If it's a very small concentrated area, probably not going to do anything to you. It might irritate your lungs more than having a suffocation impact.
Right.
But you definitely want to clear it out. That is how it extinguishes the fire.
Well, let me ask you this. I was told, because I know that, for example, when we sell houses, we have an inspection. I've been told, I want to verify this with you, that the majority of house fires, I suppose barring some major fire, if they're just one independent fires, they do start in the garage. Is that correct?
Garages are definitely a higher hazard. Everybody stores their things that they don't use daily. Their vehicles are in there. Sometimes our landscaping equipment, little cans of gas are in there. We use extension cords to power the light that we need over the workbench. There are definitely higher hazards in the garage, yes.
I know that we have to have an undisturbed firewall, so with no penetration, everything, and that's kind of easy to do. And then your other recommendations, it would fair to say, is do away with as much of that as possible. Extension cords, don't do that, and close the electrical lines. So it'd be fair to say.
You want to use things as they're designed. And I know that sounds really basic, but when you have an extension cord and you're going to use it, when you're done using it, short term. So
Right.
Unplug it. Take it out of the receptacle in the wall and out of the tool. Store it, even though it's not plugged into the tool. If it's still plugged into the wall, the electrical current is still passing through that cord to an extent.
What about decks and patios? I'm guessing that, especially, of course, with wood patios, and those dry out sometimes so much. Any advice for that?
If it is wood, use treated wood. So that is a Class A wood. It's fire resistant. Like I mentioned before, your patio furniture or any umbrellas or anything that you might have on that patio. But something else that's really important too is the ground cover underneath the deck or patio and around it. So even if you can't physically access it without removing a portion of that, embers can get in between the deck and patio members and start a smoldering fire underneath, which can then grow even over the course of a couple days.
Wow.
And start fires that way too. We recommend just don't put any bark or mulch underneath or around them. Keep it either just like bare soil or the decomposed granite or gravel.
All right, that makes sense. Now you're talking about fire retardant wood.
Mhm.
Is once the wood's up there, and let's say it's just, we'll call it regular wood, is there a product you can spray on it? Is that how that works? Or
I believe they have a roll-on application.
okay, like paint.
It's similar. Yes, it's
Okay.
a treatment. Yes, it's almost like a stain, but it has the chemical in it that will absorb into the wood.
What are the most common mistakes homeowners make, which would increase their house from catching fire? If that makes sense.
An excessive amount of storage and or misuse of appliances. A really large cause of fires in just US cooking, a home unattended food left on the stove, whether they forget in their home or they forget and they leave. But reducing the overall amount of storage in your home and using things as they're designed, plug microwaves and refrigerators directly into the wall, just maintaining them. If they blow a fuse for whatever reason, don't just go out and flip it back on. Maybe figure out what happened, and maybe the appliance, if you have an older home, it's beyond the rating or the capacity of your panel. So looking at stuff like that to make sure that it's not going to overload the system.
What about ember resistant vents? You talked about, what was the size again? 1/16?
That's the minimum. So I think the range is 1/16, and most widely you'll see openings less than 1/8 of an inch.
Are there any local or state regulations regarding fireproofing that we should be aware of?
Most local fire departments, especially the ones with the wildland urban interfaces, have local ordinances, and they will make the state guidelines for defensible space. They'll either adopt them as they are, which you're required to do if you live within those zones, or they'll make them a little bit more strict and ask you to go a little bit above and beyond. Usually they're not very different in a sense that we don't want to impact the homeowner too much, but we still want to give them a little bit more of an advantage.
Is there a profession, or would that be you, where let's say I buy a house and I thought, gosh, I don't know what the heck to do and I don't want to do it myself. Who would someone call to have them and pay them to come over and inspect their house very thoroughly and fill in the gaps or make the suggestions that are necessary. Is there such a person that can do that? And who is that person?
So there are contractors that do that. There are companies that specialize in home hardening, and the Office of the State Fire Marshal website has resources for products. They have an approved product list. They even have like a homeowner checklist of things that you can do, and they prioritize it for low to moderate income households. So there's things that you can do yourself, and then they have contractors and people who specialize in it listed on the website.
What's that website? Can you say the website for our listeners?
Sure. The Office of the State Fire Marshal kind of goes into any incentives that are offered. It's tied in with the Cal OES. So that is the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. And they have a wildfire mitigation program, and it offers financial assistance and other resources for homeowners for home hardening.
Okay. So go on that website. They'll give you a nice detailed list of things that you can do or contractors who can come out and do that for you.
Yep.
How about firewood? I know it's funny. When I first got selling real estate, fireplaces were much more of a desirable thing to have in houses. But boy, I rarely get people who even want fireplaces anymore. Any advice on storing wood for fireplaces?
Keep them at least 30 feet from your house, if possible. If your lot doesn't allow for that distance, and keep it away from your house and also away from any combustible fences. So if you have a wood fence, don't put it up against your wood fence or your neighbor's yard. Definitely keep it away from any other vegetation. Don't store it under a tree. And then they recommend also having it stacked on bare soil. So we call it scratch. So scratch the dirt around it so that a fire can't necessarily go right up to it. It'll hit dirt before it hits your wood pile.
Are there any emergency fire suppression systems like sprinklers that you would recommend for residential properties?
The state actually passed laws over 10 years ago that every home that's built in the state is required to have an NFP 13D fire sprinkler system installed. Local jurisdictions such as mine, we have an ordinance that if you add on to your home or you do an addition over the period of 2 years, so anything greater than a certain percentage, whether it's one addition or multiple additions within that time period, you have to sprinkler the whole house. But the thing is, those systems are meant for life safety. They're not meant for fire suppression. The water supplies typically aren't robust enough to have a full extinguishing system. You can get them installed, but they're more for commercial use applications.
That leads me to another thing, because I know I bring my wife into this so much here, but because we have a sprinkler system and we thought, well, but the sprinkler system ruins the whole house anyway. What's the big deal? But you just hit the nail on the head. It's for life-saving situations to where you're saving a life. You don't care about the structure. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and only one goes off at a time. So not everybody knows that. So if there is a fire, I'll use a bed, for an example, in a bedroom. If there's a fire in a bedroom and the comforter is on fire, the mattress is catching fire, there's one sprinkler in that room, that one sprinkler is going to go off. The rest of the house will not be touched unless those individual sprinklers are activated. So it's not a all for one like you see in the movies.
Right.
It's really only the ones that are directly affected from the temperature increase where the fire is located.
Oh, that's really good to know. I had no idea that was the case. So, it's funny because I've had houses where, speaking of fire sprinklers, to touch those things, I don't want to say it's illegal, but it's very strict, right?
From a contractor perspective, you need a state license, C16. From a homeowner's perspective, you take liability if you turn it off. Meaning, if you purchased your home and it has fire sprinklers and you say, yeah, I don't want this thing. I don't want to risk it leaking, or whatever your justification is, and you somehow figure out how to completely turn it off and you go to file an insurance claim because you had a fire or something like that, they're going to do, their investigative process and maybe determine that the sprinkler system didn't activate. And then they always want to know why, if something goes wrong. So you're taking that liability if you alter the system, and then contractors usually won't touch it unless they have that license because they know better.
So it's a specific license dealing with sprinklers. You can't just have any contractor come over and know what the heck they're doing. You need to get someone that's qualified specifically for sprinklers.
Yeah. And those little covers that you might have in your home, the flat covers, those are actually a rated portion of the system. So you're not supposed to paint them. You're not supposed to put any seal around them, right? To make it with the ceiling anymore, because those are temperature rated to literally pop off at a certain temperature so that the sprinkler can be exposed, and then that will then activate and the water will come out.
So tell us more about evacuation plans. I know I've talked to my family about it, but tell us maybe some good common sense tips how to deal with evacuating a home?
So the best thing to do is to have a plan and to practice it. Sounds super basic, but most people are like, yeah, I know how to get out of my house. But to actually have a plan in place to know what would we do if our front door is blocked? Okay, where are our other options to exit the house? Is it a back door? And then having a common meeting place, because you might be spread out throughout the home, different family members in different places. Where are we going to agree to meet upon? So I'm not worried about if you're not there and I know you're home, I'm going to wonder if you made it out. And then also no two ways out of every room. Like I said, the front door is blocked. What if your bedroom door is blocked? What does it look like outside of the bedroom window? So know in advance, is there a cactus under there?
Oh,
So you're going to have to, plan for that. Then make sure that children and elderly are also part of that plan and that they also practice with you if they are living in the home or they are there often, because they're the populations that are most vulnerable and they might need assistance either physically or with guidance and mentally. Hey, come on, it's time to go. Those are the most important things, having a plan and practicing it.
in my house, I have a pool. How can a pool play a role? I mean, is that something where, okay, everybody jump in the pool?
I've heard of people doing that. I've actually heard of some people have said they've authorized the fire department to use, they'll use the water if there's a wildland fire or something and the water supply is low or there's not a hydrant right outside. I've heard of them using that. They drop a little pump in there and use your pool water. I would not recommend jumping in the water because while your body might be okay in the water, the air right above the surface is going to be really hot. And you're still not going to be able to breathe the air if fire's coming over you, whether your body's cool or not. Your lungs will singe.
Ooh, okay. So it wasn't a bad question. We're going to leave that question in there. You talked about the pumps that fire departments have. Can a homeowner have a pump like that or do they? I'm guessing it's not uncommon.
I've heard of them, yeah. It's one of those above and beyond things. People will purchase them and they'll have them ready. They'll get some fire hose, which is available to the public, and make sure that they have it there. Obviously, the fire department we come with our own equipment.
Right.
Some people like to use it, not necessarily from their pool, but they'll use some of the other equipment to help with their vegetation. If they know a fire's coming, they'll help kind of pre-water stuff. We always say, leave it to the experts. We don't want somebody staying longer than they should be. But if they have a pump and some hose there and for some reason, it had to leave it at a different house, firefighters might pick it up and use it if it looks like it will work. It's really a discretionary call for the personnel that are there.
Boy, they didn't have to tell us twice. When we got evacuated, it was okay, we're out of here. Fine.
Yeah, that's the best thing to do.
We had to go stay at a hotel. This may or may not be good or bad, but when you get evacuated, your insurance covers the evacuation costs. So that was kind of nice that we got reimbursed for the. Are there any grants or incentives that are available to homeowners who invest in fireproofing their property?
There are. The state offers some grants and financial assistance through the Cal OES website. On that website, they have all the resources of the equipment or the devices that you would use, the structural components, and then the financial assistance links. So to see if you qualify, they will definitely provide that assistance and low cost installations as well.
I had a close friend of mine that lost his house. One of the last fires. Was it 2008 was the big one that we had around here?
Through Anaheim Hills and Yorba, East Yorba.
Yeah. And he was describing, he's telling me, Darryl, we looked out our back sliding glass door and all I saw was a wall of fire. Mm-hmm. And you cannot believe how fast it engulfed our house. I think that's possibly something that people kind of misjudge. And I'm guessing on this, that the speed of these fires can be crazy.
Yes, they can move very quickly, especially when it's hot and dry. It preheats essentially all summer long. And then towards the end of our fire season, which is now September, October, things are just crispy. And so when they're crispy, they go hot and fast. They have more fuel, like your shrubs and your trees, they're going to stay ignited for longer, and then they're going to cast those embers. So it's kind of just the perfect storm. They can move really fast.
Yeah, he was amazed. He said, we didn't even have time to get in our car. He said, we had to run out the front door. The cars burned and everything.
Wow.
Yeah. So now I have my last question. Is there anything new on the horizon to help poor California or anybody out with these fires?
I think the biggest issue, and we talk about this a lot in my field, is we're growing. So we build these homes and these community developments into the wildland urban interface. And that's why it may seem like it's coming to us more often. But in reality, we've encroached into that. area, and many areas actually in our region, seems like it's more of a threat. So I don't know that there's anything new from our perspective. We kind of knew about it. I think it's AB 38. Does that sound familiar? When you sell your home in the wildland urban interface, you're required to have a fire department inspection prior to the sale of the home to determine the defensible space. That is one of the newest things that's been implemented just to kind of help with these areas. But in general, we're just trying to go with it, prevent as much damage as possible.
And some common sense habits are probably the most useful. Yeah,
and listen, when you're told to evacuate, be ready, but also leave when they say, hey, you got to go. Worrying about people, that's our main focus, life, then property, and then their environment. So we're going to focus on somebody if they didn't evacuate and they're in immediate need versus our other focus is, the fire.
Amanda, thank you so much for joining the Jones Zone. I hope the audience found this very, very helpful. And those of you that have not subscribed yet, please click on that subscribe button. It'll help get this video out to more and more people to help fireproof their home. So thank you. Thank you, Amber, so very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.